Hi there, this is Sean, the Honest Book Reviewer, with another book review. In this video, we're discussing Hyde, written by Kiersten White. It's a horror novel, and I think it's the first adult novel from the author. So the author wrote young adult novels previously. This is meant to be a take on a Greek myth, and when you read it, you realise which one. So it's a myth about the maze and the Minotaur, basically. The strongest vibe I get from this book is not the Greek myth. The strongest vibe I get is that it's borrowing from so many other books, from the Hunger Games, from the Maze Runner series, and also the Divergent series. The first part of this book dives back into history, so we get a little bit of history that kind of whet our taste buds a bit, I think, and it does work. It's an interesting way to start the book, and it does make you want to dive in and find out what it's all about. So the start of the book is a great hook, and it does work. It dragged me into the book, into the story. Then we jump into the present day, and we meet our main character, Mac. Now Mac, she's homeless. We learn that Mac has a tragic past, that when she was young, her family was murdered, and murdered by her father. And she hid and was able to get away. She was the only survivor. And she carries around a lot of guilt about that, and also a lot of fear. She's suffering from PTSD, obviously, and she carries it around the whole time in this story. Mac is a fairly well-rounded character, not perfect, but probably the most developed character in this book. But she's not the character I like the most. I liked two other characters that we meet a bit later on, and in this book, the whole theme is that Mac is one of 14 people who's invited as a contestant to be on a reality contest. They think it's going to be a reality TV contest, so they're going to be dumped into this old fairground, and they've got to stay there for a certain amount of time, 7 days I think it is, and it's a game of hide and seek. So they have to hide, and then when they're found, they lose the game and they're out. So that's what they think they're doing in this game. That's why they think they're going to this place. They don't know where it is. It's just an abandoned fairground, and they think they're playing, I guess, an extreme version of hide and seek. There are a lot of characters to meet and learn about in this book, and some are fleshed out more than others, and that's a choice, I think, by the author, because some characters vanish early on. So we don't need to know a lot about them. We just get the sense of kind of who they are through Mac's eyes, and Mac's more interested in not their names, but in something else about them, some defining feature. Later on, as Mac gets to know the other characters that stay around for longer, she gets to use their names a bit more, and the reader starts to think of them by their name as well. Two of the characters I really enjoy from this group are Brandon and Delange, and I think they're great characters, both of them. Even though they're not the main character, they bring a lot to the book, and their backgrounds, their whole character, persona, personality, everything about them feels really well crafted and well rounded. I thought the author did a great job in creating these characters. They're very consistent, and they don't feel like characters that are, stereotypes. A lot of the other characters in this book feel like stereotypes, and I just wonder if the author just watched a few reality TV shows and pulled out stereotypes from them to put into this book. And it feels like the author was pulling as many stereotypes as possible and putting them in this book, in this set of characters. That felt a little bit forced to me, a little bit off. After we're given the really good intro, and even the first part of the present day story is good, it then just goes to middle ground, and it starts to get very slow and a bit repetitive. With the hide and seek thing, it's just very repetitive. When they go and hide, come back to base camp, talk about things, maybe sleep, eat, and go and hide again. It's very slow, very repetitive, and I had to force myself to push through this book, to be honest. Towards the end, the conclusion of the story, it picks up again. And I did enjoy the conclusion. I felt that it fit the story. I felt that it was a good conclusion, and I was very happy with it. But unfortunately, that big middle part of the story, and it is a big chunk that's very slow, I didn't really enjoy that. And that really coloured my view of this book overall. Because we have to rate a book overall. We can't just say, yeah, I like the beginning, I like the end, that's okay, I'll give it a higher rating. It doesn't work like that. So I just felt the author lost the plot a bit in the middle and picked it up towards the end. The author makes a big point, and there's a lot of chatter about this book, about there being themes of class divide, about the environment, and about gun violence. Key things that seem to be in the social space at the moment. I don't get that so much in this book. If it's there, it's very subtle, and I think it's very odd to say that it's so strong and prevalent in this book, when the book's just about a hide-and-seek game. I just think the author, if it wants to bring that sort of thing into the book, make it more prevalent, bring it to the forefront a bit more. There's nothing really there about climate change, about environmental disaster. And I just think that's an odd thing to say, that this book includes that theme. There is a little bit there maybe about violence, but it's very, very subtle, and this overall story kind of overpowers that theme. And about class divide, look, it is there a little bit, but I wouldn't say that it's a deliberate thematic discussion on class divide in this book. I'd say that the author just has some characters in the book that are quite wealthy, and they think they can do what they want to stay wealthy. And if that's what the author's alluding to about class divide, then so be it. It is there, but I just think it's a very long bow to draw those two, to draw that conclusion. And I just think, just give us a horror story. Don't make it out that it's much more than it actually is. Mac is our main character. Look, I think the author tried too hard to make this character seem tough. The character went through a lot in the past before the timeline in this book, and that builds a lot what the character is now. And you do get her vulnerability. You do see that she's quite frail, quite timid in some ways. She wants to hide all the time, doesn't want to get close to people. So you can understand all that based on what the character went through in her past. But then the author tries to make her seem a bit tough as well as the story goes on, and that just seems a bit wrong, a bit forced. And this character, even though it's the main character, is definitely not my favourite character in the book. Brandon, I think, is a really good character, and I've got to say he's probably my favourite character in this book. He just has this goofiness, this eagerness that makes him feel so human. And he just seems so consistent and so genuine and so organic. His whole construct, his whole personality in the book feels very organic and not forced. And I think the author was clever in presenting the character in that way. Whether it's deliberate or not on the author's part, I'm not sure, but this character stood out for me and is my favourite in this book. Ava, well, one of the Avas, because the author put two Avas in this book, and I thought that was an odd choice. And I think it's there because the author wants to have a running gag about Ava 1 and Ava 2, and which Ava thinks they're Ava 1 and Ava 2. But I don't think it needed that. This Ava is Army Ava, and I think this character is very one-dimensional. There's not much to her. It's all about aggressiveness and trying to show strength and trying to protect people which she thinks need protection, forcing that kind of protection on people. That's what I get at the start of this book. She's kind of forcing her way into Mac's life by Mac's side at the start of this game when they're all together for the first time. And that felt to me a bit strange. This character felt a bit aggressive, maybe a bit violent, and maybe a bit traumatized by experiences in the army that affect their personality a little bit. That's what I got from this character, but it's very one-dimensional because you don't get to see much more about the character. You just see that. That was a bit of a shame. If this character was just fleshed out a bit more, I think it could have been a great character. From the reviews and the ratings that I saw about this book, I thought it'd be a great read. It really wasn't. I found it a bit poor, especially with the type of horror it's meant to be. So it's meant to be either a creature horror or a slasher horror, and I think in both aspects it fails. It fails to bring that tension around those themes into this book. The creature just seems a bit weak, and you don't get to see much of it, and you don't get to see any tension, suspense about what it does. If it's a slasher horror, you don't get to see much of that either. So I think the author needed to up the ante on the horror element in this book to make it more engaging, to drag the reader into those horror elements and to give us some real scares, because it fails in that aspect. I rate it a 2 out of 5. I think it could have been a good story if the horror element was stronger. The bones of the story are pretty good, It's a good concept. The whole thing about hiding in like an extreme version of hide and seek, I thought that was a good concept, but just make it a bit more horror based and don't borrow so much from other books. I thought this book borrowed too much. On my channel, I review quite a few horror books. If you don't want to miss out on those reviews, check out my channel and subscribe. There's also a horror playlist. Check that out too. It should be on your screen now.